My husband's ex-wife told everyone I was crazy, so I let her new husband discover the truth about her. The whole thing started when I married someone who came with baggage I never expected to deal with. His ex-wife had been painting me as some kind of unhinged woman to anyone who would listen for months, before I even knew it was happening. She told their mutual friends that I was jealous, controlling, and completely unstable. She spread stories about how I supposedly screamed at her during drop-offs for their daughter, which never happened, because I made it a point to stay inside during those exchanges. What really got to me was how she managed to convince even some of my husband's family members that I was the problem. His sister started treating me differently at family gatherings, giving me these looks like I was some kind of threat. His mother became distant and would barely make eye contact with me during holidays. I felt like I was going crazy myself because I knew I hadn't done anything wrong, but somehow I was being painted as the villain in this story. The breaking point came when I found out she had been telling people at their daughter's school that I was dangerous. A teacher actually pulled my husband aside to ask if everything was okay at home because of the things his ex had been saying. That's when I realized this wasn't just petty drama anymore. This woman was actively trying to damage my reputation and potentially my safety. I started documenting everything after that. Every interaction, every false story that got back to me, every time she tried to manipulate a situation. I kept screenshots of her social media posts where she would make vague references to dealing with difficult people in her life. I saved voicemails where she would call our house and leave these passive-aggressive messages about how concerned she was for her daughter's well-being. The really twisted part was how she would act completely different when other people were around. During school events, she would be all smiles and fake concern, asking me how I was doing in this sickeningly sweet voice. She would make comments about how hard it must be for me to adjust to being a stepmom, but in a way that made it sound like I was struggling with basic human decency. Meanwhile, her new husband seemed completely oblivious to what was going on. He was this really nice guy who would wave at us during pickups and seemed genuinely friendly. I started to feel sorry for him because I could see he had no idea what kind of person he had married. He would make these innocent comments about how his wife was so good at handling difficult situations, not realizing he was talking about manufactured drama. Then something happened that changed everything. Their daughter, who was about 8 at the time, started having some behavioral issues at school. The counselor wanted to have a meeting with both sets of parents to discuss what was going on. During that meeting, some things came to light that made me realize the ex-wife's pattern of behavior went way deeper than I had thought. The school counselor mentioned that the little girl had been talking about feeling confused because her mom would tell her one thing about me and her dad, but then what she experienced when she was with us was completely different. The child was starting to show signs of anxiety because she felt like she was caught between two different versions of reality. She loved spending time with us, but she felt guilty about it because her mom had convinced her that we didn't really care about her. That's when I realized this woman wasn't just trying to make my life difficult. She was actually damaging her own daughter's mental health with her lies and manipulation. The little girl was developing trust issues and anxiety because she couldn't reconcile what her mother was telling her with what she was actually experiencing. It broke my heart to see how this innocent child was being used as a pawn in her mother's twisted game. I decided I needed to do something, but I couldn't confront the ex-wife directly because that would just give her more ammunition to use against me. Instead, I started paying closer attention to her new husband and looking for opportunities to let him see the truth for himself. I didn't want to actively sabotage their relationship, but I also couldn't stand by and watch this pattern continue. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. The ex-wife had been planning this elaborate birthday party for their daughter, and she had invited a bunch of people from school and the neighborhood. She was using the party as another chance to play the victim and get sympathy from other parents. She kept making these comments about how stressful it was to plan everything while dealing with difficult co-parenting situations. Her new husband was running around trying to help with everything, clearly stressed out and confused by all the drama his wife was creating. I watched him getting more and more frustrated as the day went on because nothing seemed to be good enough for her. She was snapping at him in front of other people and making him look like he was incompetent, even though he was doing everything he could to help. Then the moment came that I had been waiting for. The ex-wife's phone rang during the party, and she stepped away to take the call. She left her phone on the kitchen counter when she went to check on something outside, and I saw her new husband glance at it when another call came in. The caller ID showed my husband's name, and I could see the confusion on his face because he knew his wife had been telling everyone that we were the ones causing problems. What happened next was perfect timing that I couldn't have planned if I tried. The ex-wife came back inside and saw her husband looking at her phone. She immediately started getting defensive and accusatory, asking him why he was checking up on her and making accusations about trust. Her reaction was so over the top and suspicious that it made him even more curious about what was really going on. I watched from across the room as this whole scene unfolded. She was getting more and more agitated, and he was getting more and more confused by her behavior. Other parents at the party started noticing the tension, and I could see them exchanging glances and whispering to each other. The perfect image she had been trying to maintain was starting to crack right in front of everyone. Later that evening, after the party was over, I got a call from my husband telling me that the ex-wife's husband had reached out to him. Apparently, after all the drama at the party, he had started asking his wife some direct questions about the things she had been saying about us. Her answers didn't add up, and he was starting to realize that there might be more to the story than what she had been telling him. Over the next few weeks, the truth started coming out piece by piece. The new husband began paying closer attention to how his wife talked about other people and how she handled conflicts. He started noticing patterns in her behavior that he had overlooked before. She would create drama and then play the victim when people reacted to her manipulation. She would twist conversations and situations to make herself look like the innocent party who was just trying to keep the peace. The really shocking part came when he found some old messages on her computer from before they got married. She had been badmouthing him to her friends while they were dating, calling him boring, and saying she was only with him for financial stability. She had been planning to use him as a stepping stone while she figured out her next move. The messages showed a completely different side of her personality than what she had been showing him. But the most damaging discovery was when he found evidence that she had been doing this same thing to my husband during their marriage. She had been telling her friends and family that he was abusive and controlling, even though there was no truth to any of it. She had been building cases against people in her life for years, collecting ammunition to use against them whenever it suited her purposes. The new husband was devastated when he realized how thoroughly he had been manipulated. He started reaching out to other people who had been in his wife's life, and he discovered that this was a pattern that went back years. She had burned bridges with former friends, family members, and coworkers using the same tactics she had been using against us. What really sealed the deal was when he talked to their daughter about some of the things her mother had been saying. The little girl, in her innocent way, started telling him about how her mom would coach her on what to say about us. She had been teaching her daughter to lie and manipulate situations, using the child as a weapon in her personal wars against people she didn't like. The marriage didn't survive this revelation. The new husband filed for divorce within a few months, and suddenly, the ex-wife found herself in the position of having to explain to everyone why her second marriage was falling apart so quickly. The same people who had been sympathetic to her stories about difficult co-parenting situations started questioning whether she might have been the common denominator in all her relationship problems. The aftermath was both satisfying and sad to watch. The ex-wife tried to spin the story to make herself look like the victim again, but people weren't buying it anymore. Too many inconsistencies had been exposed, and too many people had started comparing notes about their experiences with her. Her reputation in the community began to unravel as people realized they had been manipulated. The most important outcome was that the custody arrangement changed. With all the evidence that had come to light about her manipulative behavior and how she had been using their daughter as a pawn, the court decided that a different arrangement would be in the child's best interest. The little girl started spending more time with us, and we could see the improvement in her emotional state almost immediately. She stopped walking on eggshells around us and started acting like a normal kid. She didn't have to worry about reporting back to her mother about every little thing that happened at our house. She could just be herself and enjoy spending time with her dad and me without feeling guilty about it. The anxiety and behavioral issues that had been developing at school started to resolve themselves once she wasn't caught between two different versions of reality anymore. The ex-wife's new husband actually became an ally in this whole situation. He felt terrible about the role he had unknowingly played in enabling her behavior, and he wanted to make sure the little girl was protected from further manipulation. He provided testimony about what he had witnessed and discovered, which helped establish a pattern of behavior that the court couldn't ignore. Looking back on the whole experience, I learned some important lessons about dealing with manipulative people. The most effective approach wasn't to fight fire with fire, or to try to defend myself against every false accusation. Instead, it was about creating opportunities for the truth to reveal itself naturally. People who engage in this kind of behavior eventually expose themselves if you give them enough rope. The key was documenting everything and staying consistent in my own behavior. I never gave her any real ammunition to use against me because I was always careful to take the high road, even when she was being completely unreasonable. This made it easier for other people to see the contrast between her claims and reality when the truth finally came out. I also learned that people who are skilled manipulators often target those who are naturally trusting and want to believe the best in others. The ex-wife's new husband was a perfect example of this. He was a genuinely good person who couldn't imagine that someone would be capable of such elaborate deception. She had chosen him specifically because she knew he wouldn't question her stories or look too closely at inconsistencies. The most satisfying part of the whole ordeal was watching her face when she realized that her house of cards was falling down. She had built her entire identity around being the victim in every situation, and when that narrative fell apart, she didn't know how to function. She kept trying to find new people to blame and new stories to tell, but nobody was interested in listening anymore. The community response was particularly telling. People who had been avoiding us or treating us with suspicion suddenly started reaching out to apologize. They admitted that they had been influenced by her stories and that they felt foolish for not seeing through the manipulation sooner. Some of them shared their own experiences with her behavior that they had previously dismissed or rationalized away. It took almost 2 years for the full truth to come out and for the situation to stabilize. During that time, I had to develop a lot of patience and resilience. There were days when I wanted to give up and just move away to start over somewhere else. The constant stress of being falsely accused and having my reputation attacked was exhausting, both emotionally and mentally. But I'm glad I stuck it out, because the outcome was better than I could have hoped for. Not only was I vindicated, but a child was protected from further psychological damage, and a good man was saved from what would have been years of manipulation and emotional abuse. The ex-wife's pattern of behavior was finally exposed, and she lost the ability to use the same tactics against future victims. The experience taught me that sometimes the best revenge is simply allowing the truth to come to light. I didn't have to actively sabotage anyone or engage in the same manipulative behavior that had been used against me. I just had to be patient and create opportunities for people to see the reality of the situation for themselves. Today, our family is stronger than ever. The little girl has flourished in an environment where she doesn't have to navigate lies and manipulation. My relationship with my husband's extended family has been completely restored now that they understand what really happened. Even my husband's relationship with his daughter has improved because she's no longer being coached to report back about every detail of their time together. The ex-wife eventually moved to another state after her divorce was finalized. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she tried to start over with the same playbook, but people in her new community were more skeptical of her stories. Word had gotten around about her history, and she found it much harder to establish herself as a credible victim in a new place. I still think about that whole period of my life sometimes, and I'm amazed at how much drama one person can create when they're determined to make everyone else's life difficult. But I'm also proud of how I handled the situation and how things ultimately turned out. It would have been easy to sink to her level and engage in the same kind of manipulative behavior, but that would have made me just as bad as she was. The most important lesson I took away from the whole experience is that the truth has a way of coming out eventually, especially when someone is engaging in a pattern of deceptive behavior. It might take time, and it might require patience and careful documentation. But eventually, people who lie and manipulate others will expose themselves if you give them enough opportunities to do so. Now, when I encounter similar situations or hear about other people dealing with manipulative individuals, I always advise them to take the high road and focus on documenting the truth rather than trying to fight back with the same tactics. It's harder in the short term, but it's much more effective in the long run, and it allows you to maintain your integrity throughout the process. The whole experience changed me in ways I didn't expect. I became much better at recognizing manipulative behavior and setting boundaries with people who try to create unnecessary drama. I also became more confident in my own judgment and less likely to doubt myself when someone tries to gaslight me or make me question my own perception of reality. Looking back, I can see that the ex-wife's behavior was actually a gift in disguise. It forced me to develop skills and strength that I never knew I had, and it ultimately made my family stronger and more united. We went through fire together, and we came out the other side with a deeper appreciation for honesty and genuine relationships. The little girl, who is now a teenager, sometimes talks about that period in her life and how confusing it was for her. She's grateful that the adults in her life eventually figured out how to protect her from the manipulation and create a stable environment where she could grow up without having to choose sides or keep secrets. She's developed into a confident, honest young woman who has learned to value authentic relationships over drama and manipulation. In the end, justice was served not through any elaborate scheme or revenge plot, but simply through patience, documentation, and allowing the truth to speak for itself. The ex-wife's own behavior was ultimately her downfall, and all I had to do was create the right conditions for other people to see what was really happening. Sometimes the best way to deal with a manipulative person is to simply step back and let them expose themselves.